Thanks for joining, Sitaram.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Can we start off maybe just by talking about what multi-cloud is and what multi-cluster is, and if there is a difference?
Yes, absolutely. Multi-cloud definitely, when you think about it, is a strategy. I mean, many of the organizations essentially adopt it as a way to manage risk across multiple cloud environments. So if I were to back up a little bit, as you know, many of the organizations today are pivoting to be a cloud-first organization. So they take their workloads that they're running in their data center for a long time and adopting a cloud-native strategy or a cloud-first strategy. Part of that also means that they get to choose a cloud provider, which cloud they operate in, which cloud they hit their bets on, which cloud they completely rely on from the perspective of engagement, workload management, all of those things. That said, there's also an inherent risk with that. For many organizations, placing all of their bets on one single cloud provider means also relying on everything that cloud provider has to offer. So from that perspective, many of the organizations, especially the one which want to manage risk in a better way, adopt multiple cloud strategy. And what I mean by multiple cloud strategy is to essentially make sure that their workloads are spread across in a way where one cloud provider's outage or a downtime doesn't cause the business to suffer. That is a strategy many of the organizations adopt when they go into or when they adopt a multi-cloud strategy. Essentially saying that we operate in multiple cloud environments. Some of the core services potentially run in a cloud environment. The other set of services potentially run in another cloud environment. Essentially making sure that they are using the best of the services that are available in each of the cloud providers' environment. That is one aspect of looking at it. The other aspect of looking at it is also for the ones that are adopting a multi-cloud strategy is to essentially replicate what they have in one single cloud provider to other cloud providers as well. So that way they are essentially building for scale and also availability, making sure that everything is from a customer's perspective is running in a way it should run without having to worry about any outages. As I mentioned that we all know that as much as cloud providers thrive to make sure all of their services are always available, they've all experienced some kind of an outage due to many reasons that puts some of the services not accessible. From a customer's point of view, that could mean a loss of revenue, a loss of credibility, loss of time, effort, all of those things. And that's essentially where multi-cloud strategy is something that is adopted. Multi-cluster slightly pivots the conversation to where and how you're managing your workloads themselves. Cloud strategy obviously doesn't specifically talk about which services or which specific kind of services that you're using within the cloud. So multi-cluster strategy goes into where and how you're running your workloads. Specifically talking about, let's say, a containerization strategy that is adopted by an organization. Customer decides that they are going to start to migrate all of their applications, either net new or what they have currently, into a cloud native strategy. Part of that involves one, choosing a cloud. We talked about it in the form of a multi-cloud strategy. Second piece is, where do you want to run your workloads? And when you containerize your applications, that containerized applications need some kind of a vehicle to run. And we have all established over a period of the many, many years, and especially you, Matt, have been involved very closely with that, is that vehicle happens to be Kubernetes for many organizations. So that adoption of Kubernetes obviously has grown to the extent that people not just run their net new applications, but essentially running their critical applications that has essentially been the bread and butter of the organizations for a long time. Again, when you run those containerized applications, so you chosen a cloud provider, and part of that, the notion of a cluster is specific to Kubernetes. And when you run those applications in Kubernetes, Do you want to run it in a single cluster? Do you want to run it across multiple clusters? Do you want to run this across multiple clusters within a single cloud provider? Do you want to run it multiple clusters across multiple cloud providers? All of these are design choices that the organization has to make essentially to manage risk. And that's exactly what it is, purely from the perspective of from the strategy that organizations adopt.
A multi-cloud is the mix of the cloud environments that you run your workloads in. MultiCluster is specifically related to the abstraction of Kubernetes on top of that, and where and how you decide to set up your Kubernetes clusters within that multi-cloud environment. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Coming back then to the beginning again, specifically around multi-cloud, how do people decide which cloud they're going to go into and when to adopt a multi-cloud strategy?
An excellent question. I think this is a design choice that everybody has to deal with at some point as they decide, which cloud provider they go with. One of the first things that typically happens in many organizations as they decide to go cloud first is to choose a cloud provider, and that choice obviously come with many things that they have to consider. Their ability to work with that cloud provider. In many cases, we know that organizations also choose cloud provider based on any competitive threats. All of those play into a role on, and more importantly, also the expertise that they have within the organization to operate in a specific cloud environment. Some of the considerations, obviously, that are made as somebody chooses a cloud provider. Even within multi-cloud, many organizations always have a primary cloud provider, and that's probably what you're asking about, the choice or the decision that goes into choosing that cloud provider. And those things typically, just as you would evaluate any other service, technology, pretty sure every organizations go through that process of evaluation of what best suits our needs in terms of the workloads and the kind of applications that we run, the kind of experience that we want to provide to our end consumers. And all of those things essentially translate to choosing a cloud provider. Obviously, technology plays a huge role. And we all know that many of these cloud providers have overlapping services that pretty much provide all capabilities within a cloud environment. So it essentially comes down to, one, the value that a specific cloud provider provides; two, the expertise that they have, obviously, within the organization to adopt a specific cloud strategy; and three, as it's nothing to do with technology or process. It's sometimes we just don't operate in a specific cloud because we see them as competition, so we cannot operate there. Sometimes elimination also is part of the strategy, where some cloud providers are purely eliminated based on the fact that they are competition.
Amongst the customers that you speak to day in, day out, what are the typical clouds that you see being used? Is there any sort of patterns that you see in that, or really is it different in every single case?
It is different in many cases also. For example, who are part of, let's say, financial organizations, they do want to be a cloud-first company, except not a public cloud-first company. So they run and operate private cloud. And we talked about Kubernetes. Obviously, the part of that also requires strategy around, how we run workloads, and they have their own cluster environment in the form of OpenShift, because that allows them to run things in their private cloud. So as much as we say public cloud as a choice when we talk about multi-cloud, the whole idea of a private cloud, a cloud-like environment that the organizations themselves manage, is also something that I see very often. And this is specific to many of the highly regulated organizations. Outside of this, the usual suspects, obviously, see Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, all of them equally being adopted across many organizations. But in the spectrum of multi-cloud, you can almost imagine the popular cloud providers plus the private cloud strategy that organizations adopt essentially make up the multi-cloud environment for an organization.
Still have questions? Turn to Venafi, the machine identity experts. Check out our channel or visit venafi.com to learn about all things encryption, certificate management, and more.